out their book, their graphs, their piece of paper. So I'm waiting to see all that stuff out on your desk, and everything else can go underneath your desk. So I need your book out. Open your book up to page 165. 165. Page 165, Tyler. Piece of paper. You're going to need a piece of paper to write your answers on today, and then you need to have your 3 graphs that we created. Okay. Now, on page 165, you have all the information that we've been using to create our graphs. So, we created 3 graphs. We created a bar graph, we created 2 pie graphs, and we used the information on page 165 to do that, correct?
Yes.
Okay, now what we're going to do, it's time for us to analyze our information and analyze and take a look at our graphs and draw some conclusions from that information. Okay? And also just practicing getting information from a graph. Okay? So our assignment today is we're going to be working on the analyze and conclude questions that are on page 165, numbers 1 through 5. Okay, so that's why you're there. Now, we're going to break into pairs here in a little while, so I'll put you with a partner, and you can work together to kind of figure these things out. But I want to go through each of those questions so you know what you're supposed to be doing. Okay? No, you got to be in here too. Okay? Now, if you look at the information on 164, basically part 1 was when we made the bar graph using Excel. We created the bar graph from the spreadsheet that we created. Then part 2 was creating the pie graphs that we made, and we made those on Excel as well. Okay? Now we're to the analyze and conclude part. Okay? Now, number 1, it says observing. What information did you learn from examining the data table in step 1? So we got to go way back to what we did last Thursday. And when we first started this whole thing, we were looking at the graph and we were just basically trying to figure out how to read this chart. Okay? So what were some of the pieces of information from the chart that we had to kind of figure out before we could even get started? What were some of the things that we had to figure out? Yes? Okay, we had to figure out how we're going to label things. So what information did we have to take from the chart in order to label our graphs?
The disease kind?
Okay, we had to know what the disease or the cause of death. We needed to know what the cause of death was. What else?
How many people die from certain disease?
Very good. Go a little further, Alex. Was, like, for example, heart disease today was 246 people. Is that how many people died the entire year? Or how did we read that? Now and then, but was that the total number of people that died?
No.
No, why not?
They have different deaths of different time periods. And
Yeah. Carly?
It's deaths per 1,000.
Right, it wasn't 246 total deaths, it was 246 deaths per 100,000 people, right? And that was an important piece of information that we had to pull from that chart in order to label our graph. What were some other important pieces of information? Mason?
Since people didn't live as long in the 1900s, they didn't get as much infectious disease.
Yeah, but that's probably right, Mason, but we didn't really find that out from the chart, did we? No, that's just a conclusion you're coming up with, which actually you're going to use later on, so don't use that later. But what information did we have to get from the chart in order to make our graphs? Basic stuff off of here.
Infectious disease and non-infectious.
Right, we had to know which ones were infectious and which ones were non-infectious. How did we know which ones were infectious and which ones were non-infectious, Jessica?
The non-infectious ones have NI and the infectious ones have NI.
Exactly. So we needed to look at the chart, we needed to figure out what the NI stood for, and we needed to figure out what the I stood for, right? Those were basic things that we had to pull from the chart before we could get started and do any of the graphing, correct? Could we have done the pie graphs without knowing what NI and I stood for? No, we could not. Okay, we also couldn't have labeled our graph correctly if we didn't know it was per 100,000 people too, correct?
Yep.
Alright, so those were just basic pieces of information we had to get from the chart in order to even get started. So that's what they're looking for there with number 1. Those are the kinds of things you want to tell me about when you answer number 1. Okay, now go down to number 2. Graphing. According to the bar graph, which cause of death showed the greatest increase between 1900 and today, and the greatest decrease? Okay, so what you're going to do, guys, is you're going to examine the graphs that we created to try to figure out which one had the greatest increase and which one had the greatest decrease. Now, I'm going to borrow your graph, Spencer. Here's the bar graph that we created, and you know that the bars on the left are the information from the 1900s, right? Or from 1900. And you know that the bar on the right is the information for when? Today, now. Okay? So if the bar on the right is bigger than the bar on the left, what happened? Was there an increase or a decrease?
Increase.
If it was higher in 1900 than it was now, there's a decrease. Very good. Now if we go over to the cancer section of your bar graph, there, 1900, the bar is shorter than the today bar, so there was an increase. Very good, Spencer. There was an increase. Okay? So that's how you need to read that bar graph. So I want you to examine the bar graph with your partner, and you're going to decide, you have 2 questions to answer there, which one had the greatest increase and which one had the greatest decrease. So make sure you answer both those questions. All right, now look at 3, interpreting data. In your circle graphs, so you're going to have to use both circle graphs for this one, which category decreased the most from 1900 to today, and which one increased the most? Okay? So which one decreased and which one increased the most? So there you're going to be looking at, you're going to have to probably maybe even tear those 2 circle graphs apart and compare them side by side and answer both of those questions. Okay? You understand what you're doing there?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Number 4. Now this is where you're going to have to start using some of the things that Mason was talking about. Okay? Drawing conclusions. It says, suggest an explanation for the change in the number of deaths due to infectious diseases from 1900 to today. So for this one, you're really going to have to look at your pie graphs, okay? Your 2 pie graphs, and you're going to be talking about infectious disease. What was the percentage of infectious disease in 1900 according to your graph? Spencer?
37.
No, infectious.
Oh, it's 56%.
56%. And what was the percentage of infectious disease in right now, today? Scotty? 5%. So there's a big drop there. So your job now becomes, one of the things that Mason was talking about is to try to figure out why was there that big drop. And I don't just want you to come up with one reason. I want you to try to think about all of the things that are different now compared to what it was like back then, 110 years ago. Okay? And think about the improvements that are made and try to come up with a reason that things have improved in that area. Okay? So I want you to compose an explanation for the changes that have occurred between then and now. Yes?
But no fool, can you just list them?
No, I need a complete paragraph in complete sentences, just like normal. Okay, number 5, communicating. In a paragraph, explain how graphs help you identify patterns and other information and data that you might otherwise overlook. So here what I need you to do is look at the graphs, look at the chart, and I need you to decide why the graphs are maybe a little bit better tool to use when you're doing these kinds of questions. Why were the graphs more of a help than the chart would have been? I think eventually you could have went back and looked at the chart and figured it out, but why did the graph maybe speed things up, and why was it helpful when you were answering questions? Don't tell me now. In your answer for number 5, you'll do that. All right, questions. What are your questions? Alex?
Since, are we doing these in groups?
Yeah, you with a partner.
Can we do it on the same paper if we put both of our names on, or just have 2?
No, you each need to write it. Okay. Other questions? Spencer?
Are you going to pick partners for us?
Yes, I'm going to pick your partners. Any other questions? Okay. Tyler, you can go with Alex. Other Tyler, you can go with Marcus. Albert, you can go with Scotty. Trevor, you can go with Noah. Okay, boys move. That's all the boys, correct? Oh, Spencer, let's have you go. Oh, Mason, you go with Noah and Trevor. Spencer, you go with Marcus and Tyler. Okay, ladies. Nicole, let's have you go with Jessica. Taylor, you can go with Sydney, Emma, and
What about me?